So, effective instruction in science. So I want to start off by talking about the TPA and the central focus. So the central focus should support students' use of scientific concepts and application of scientific practices through inquiry to develop evidence-based explanations of or predictions for a real-world phenomenon based on patterns in evidence and/or data. And so this is basically saying, how do the standards and learning objectives within your learning segment address the use of science concepts? So these would be the DCIs, the application of scientific practices through inquiry. These would be the science and engineering practices, as well as the development and evaluation of evidence-based explanations of or reasonable predictions about a real-world phenomenon based on patterns of evidence and/or data. And so students are basically going to be coming up with an evidence-based explanation or a reasonable prediction about a real-world phenomena. They're going to explain it based on patterns of evidence and/or data. They're going to use the science concepts as well as the scientific practices. And this is basically asking them to come up with an explanation. And so with the introduction of the NGSS, typically science instruction would be planned in a way that you have an anchoring phenomena that anchors your entire unit or learning sequence, right? And then you would use this phenomena, which is a real world observable event, right? In the natural world, you would use this event to kind of teach the students about different ideas that kind of lead up to answering this question and coming up to an explanation to explain why this phenomena happens or how it works. And so you would have a number of anchoring phenomena on the way just to help them explain certain concepts. And so this is kind of like backwards planning. And this is how we typically want to do instructional sequencing and planning units and things like that, because science is for a while, science has been about activities and just coming up with a bunch of cool activities and teaching from there. But really, like, you need to be looking at the objectives and really think about where do you want students to be and then how do you get there. And so in terms of instructional sequencing, it typically follows the 5E model. You start off by engaging the students, piquing their student interest and getting them personally involved in the lesson while assessing prior understanding. You want to think about prior knowledge. You want to think about funds of knowledge. You want to bring something engaging. This is where you would introduce the phenomena, right? And then you would go into the exploration phase where you get students involved in the topic. So you get them to kind of explore and provide them with a chance to build their own understanding. This can be kinesthetic, right? Or this could be a technology based, like they could be exploring a portal or something along those lines. You would be modeling and teaching somewhere around here, and then in the explain phase, you provide students with an opportunity to communicate what they have learned so far and figure out what it means. This is the part where they're coming with an explanation based on how they built their own understanding. And then in the extend phase, students use their new knowledge and continue to explore its implications. And then with evaluation, both the students and the teacher determine how much learning and understanding has taken place. This can be in the form of formative or summative assessments. Really, basically, they're turning something in, they're writing something down, they're evaluating what have I learned and what is my understanding currently. And this is really helpful for teachers because you need to know where to go next, right? So ultimately, you have students coming up with an explanation or answering an essential question, and this is how you would kind of bring together your entire unit. They're answering a question or offering an explanation at the end, and along the way, you're giving them a chance to engage and explore, explain, extend, as well as evaluate. And so when it comes to effective instruction, there's a number of things that I do want to highlight, right? First things first, you have to be able to provide multiple entry points into every subject or lesson. This is where background knowledge, funds of knowledge come into play. Students have a set of skills, they have background knowledge that they can really contribute and bring to the table. And it's really important to acknowledge that. That goes hand in hand with developing students' background knowledge. In science, we do a lot of procedural things. We have experiments and things like that. And so safety is a concern. So you need to be able to describe and demonstrate each strategy or technique. Have them written down on the board. Have students create an outline, write it down in their notebooks, provide a clear sequential explanations or steps of what to do and how to do it. This is really helpful. And then you want to ensure that all students are learning each segment of the lesson before moving on to the next lesson. So teachers can use formative assessments, formal or informal, to kind of see where students are at, engaged or understanding before moving on to the next. Like I said, science education is a continuum. They need to be able to have that background knowledge. They need the foundation before they're able to understand the next go to the next step. And then lastly, effective science inquiry through literacy. Literacy is the backbone of science education. This is how students, it's my belief that this is how students participate in inquiry, right? So it's important that they're reading, that they're writing, that they're talking, right? And one way to do this is by using the science textbooks as reference books, really, allowing them to go in there, find information, introduce it as something that they can use in class, and then as well as provide supplementary text. So I'm talking magazines, articles, scientific journals, things like that, and allow them to really become scientists, because writing is a big part of science. And so through inquiry and through literacy, really, you're building academic language, right? We want to give students enough opportunities to read, write, as well as talk in science. So by building academic language, you can have them participate in more conversations by creating conversation prompts, and you can base this off a essential question. This can be based off of the phenomena that they're studying. It can be based off of a thinking skill. So for example, cause and effect, determining the cause and effect of something. It could be a product or a task, something that they're working on or turning in, or life experiences. You'd be surprised a lot of times how well science really connects to students and their everyday lives, because really it's the study of the natural world, right? And then developing academic grammar and vocabulary through conversation. So we want to be able to teach the vocabulary to students. This could be via modeling. You as a teacher are modeling how to use the vocabulary, and not just using it yourself, but giving the students opportunities to use it too. For example, if you're reading a magazine or you're reading from the textbook together as a class, and they come upon a word that is difficult to pronounce, or you come upon a vocabulary term, tell the entire class, hey, repeat after me, say this word, and they're practicing it out loud, and then things like that. And then you can create a word wall for students to reference, right? They can actually create it with the teacher, so you're not the one just creating the word wall, they're thinking it with you too. And then you could do word sort activities too for the vocabulary. Students are able to, I feel like, learn the vocabulary better when they're able to make their own connections. For example, we just did an activity, a word sort activity, where at the end of the unit, we wanted them to kind of practice the vocab. So we had them do a word sort in their groups, and they kind of sorted it into different categories and connected it. And then we had like a museum or gallery walk, and they walked around and saw how other students did it and left comments. And it's really interesting because they all had different configurations. And so also giving them grammar building conversation activities. So giving them a chance to perfect their grammar building, right? So sentence building, sentence starters, providing sentence starters and frames for student writing, right? And then as well as maybe making sentences more academic and more scientific, right? And so when it comes to academic language, we want students to talk and speak and feel like scientists. So it's important that we're addressing this need for academic language, not just in conversations, but also in writing. They need to be able to have more opportunities to write in class. As Focus Schmoker said, they should be able to do short pieces of writing throughout the year, and then have at least 2 longer pieces of writing per school year. And I have to agree with that, because we want to, literacy really is the backbone of science education, and it's the backbone of every discipline, and it should be across the board. So differentiation and scaffolding. Differentiation, we can kind of think of it as like a ramp that we're building for one student or for a group of students, but that would be of great help to all students. So we have like the more universal scaffolds, and then we have more specific scaffolds. So for example, students who need support for reading, right? You would give them the option of reading with partners or buddies when introducing a new text. Give them the text ahead of time so they can maybe look at it, right? Giving them a highlighter to mark essential pages in the text, right? So doing close reading, teacher read alouds, and then providing experts of readings on tape. And so for example, a student needs help with vocabulary building or trouble attending in class, and then students that need to address a strength in an area of study, or that need targeted instruction and practice. These are all different groups that you would be paying attention to and providing scaffolding for, and differentiation. So you're looking at the patterns across the board. And of course, we do have to think about our English learners and our students with IEPs, as well as our struggling learners and our advanced learners. With English learners and students with IEPs, maybe giving them extended deadlines to turn in assignments, maybe allowing them to work with their resource teachers outside of class if they need extra assistance, having them come into tutoring, talking to their other teachers, things like that. With English learners, making sure that the text is at the appropriate reading level, right? But also sometimes if you want to challenge students, you can do that too. Providing students who are advanced with more opportunities to engage with the curriculum, right? And not just having them, kind of sit back and wait for instruction when they're done early, right? And then thinking about seating positions, right, in the classroom, preferential seating for students with IEPs or maybe students who need a little extra help. And then thinking about where you want to place your English learners with maybe a student who's more proficient, sitting next to each other so they kind of have that opportunity to learn from one another and things like that. So it's important to consider the universal differentiation or the universal scaffolds that you want to use, but also more specifically for different groups of students, what you want to do and how to address all of their needs.